Thank you. The final item of business is a members' business debate on motion 17234 in the name of Pam Gozo on welcoming the Supreme Court's judgment on the definition of the word woman. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Pam Gozo to open the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Before I begin, I would like to welcome to the Chamber and thank for Women Scotland and all the organisations and individuals who are fighting tooth and nail for women's rights. I'm extremely proud to be standing here today delivering a speech on an issue that is so important to women and girls. These are dark days in politics, Presiding Officer. Nicola Sturgeon's dangerous gender ideology has put so many women and girls at risk. However, the UK Supreme Court's judgment on the 16th of April this year was crystal clear. The definition of the word woman in the 2010 Equality Act is based on biological sex. There is nothing controversial about this. Men cannot become women, and it's shocking that in 2025 we need the highest court in the land to define such a simple word. But where are we now? It's been 5 months since this monumental judgment that the SNP are still shamefully refusing to implement in law. In Scotland, we have nurses suspended for refusing to share changing rooms with biologically male colleagues, policies that allow for dangerous biological males in male genital to serve in women's prisons, guidance allowing for transgender offenders to be strip-searched by both male and female police officers, school guidance stating that young people, where possible, are able to use the facilities they feel more comfortable with, teachers being called transphobic for expressing legitimate concerns over the provision of unisex toilets, Scottish Government lawyers arguing that men can become pregnant. All of this could have been avoided if the law was properly implemented in the first place by the SNP government. Presiding Officer, I am not just disappointed at the Scottish Government has refused to follow the law. I am appalled. Appalled that this government has tried to silence us at every point. Appalled that during the consideration of the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, SNP ministers prioritised meeting with gender extremists that supported this dangerous bill. How could we forget that the First Minister at the time, Nicola Sturgeon, said that opponents of this bill were deeply misogynist, often homophobic, possibly some of them racist as well. And of course, when Nicola Sturgeon and other members of her government, including John Sweeney, were asked if a male double rapist is a woman, they shamefully dodged the question. But actions speak louder than words. The SNP government has wasted over £20 million in taxpayers' money to fund gender extremist organisations that are desperate to strip women and girls of their rights. This includes more than £3.6 million to the Equality Network and Scottish Trans, more than £2 million to the LGBT Youth Scotland, and more than £250,000 to Stonewall Scotland. On the subject of wasting taxpayers' money, let us not forget that the taxpayer-funded institutions such as Scotland's National Library had initially caved into the woke mob by refusing to include gender-critical books such as The Woman Who Wouldn't Wish as part of their exhibitions. And of course, this decision was reversed after the Scottish Conservatives called it out. Presiding Officer, just imagine if the shoe was on the other foot. Imagine if the Supreme Court had ruled in favour of the Scottish Government. We would not have heard the end of it. However, because the SNP did not get their way, they are dragging their heels. A recent report by the Ethical Standard Commission highlighted the tendency of policymakers to seek to apply their own policies rather than following the national law, resulting in legal cases. In fact, this government has spent hundreds and thousands of pounds in legal costs, with taxpayers footing the bill. They have already lost 2 major court battles, and hopefully justice prevails in Sandy Peggle's fight against the NHS as well. Yet, failure to implement what has been set out so clearly by the Supreme Court and by the EHRC will lead to more legal challenges. Just last weekend, it was confirmed that there will be another legal challenge from For Women Scotland over flawed trans guidance for schools and prisons. It is becoming clear that our voices as women do not matter for the law or this SNP Scottish Government. Minister, women and girls deserve answers, so I have a very simple question for the Minister. The Supreme Court judgment, will the Supreme Court judgment immediately be implemented by the Scottish Government? Happy to give way.
Minister Cook-Stewart.
Thank you. The Scottish Government has always said that we accept the ruling of the Supreme Court judgment. That is not a contentious issue, and we are working at pace to review and to implement guidance as necessary. That's not under question.
Pam Gozo.
As expected, no, yes or no. That's all I wanted, a simple answer from yourself, Minister. Let me be very clear today. I will continue this fight against this toxic gender ideology for every woman and girl in Scotland. It is my #1 priority that I will continue to hold this SNP government to account. No matter how many hurdles are thrown our way, no matter how many times they try and silence us, no matter how many times they try and slander us, women won't wish and women won't wait. I promise you, I will continue the fight with every breath I have. But how many more court cases are we going to go through before common sense prevails with the SNP government? How much more of taxpayers' money is this SNP government going to waste? The Scottish Parliament is an institution that people respect under the SNP. It has become the echo chamber under the SNP that doesn't reflect the priorities of the people of Scotland. Many women, including myself, are looking forward to receiving a response from the Minister today in closing. I hope the Minister will be able to give us that information. And also we have For Women Scotland and many other organisations and individuals waiting to hear from the Minister if she will and her government will implement this law from the Supreme Court ruling. Just a simple yes or no, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Gozo. We now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches up to 4 minutes. I call Michelle Thompson to be followed by Sharon Dowie. Ms Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thanks to Pam Gozo for bringing this debate. And can I apologise to the Chamber that I need to leave early in the conclusion of the debate. I have to tell you, it fills me with despair to be speaking again in a debate to fight for women's rights. I've never sought to be a victim, and I've always been so wary of using traumatic events in my life to draw attention to myself. Yet I feel the lack of action from the Scottish Government deeply personally. Since I had to stand up and speak about this issue, having barely been elected in 2021, then having to vote against gender recognition reform due to the casual introduction of self-ID without any consideration of safeguarding, I've met many women with a similar story to myself. My early years trauma has left me with a compelling need to feel safe, not just to be safe. I have a visceral fear of the physicality of men when encountering them in unexpected places, places where I thought I could feel safe. This visceral fear, when it kicks in, leads straight to a trauma response, which includes acute anxiety, inflammation, tingling across my face and mouth, extreme tiredness, and so on. And this is how I live my life. Therefore, having to continually stress the need for protected safe places, for dignity, safety and privacy is constantly re-triggering. Having to continually press the Scottish Government to do the right thing is constantly re-triggering. Yet, given the fact that 89% of those reporting serious sexual assault in Scotland being women, I'm not alone. I'm actually fairly typical. In this chamber, there are women similar to me, both MSPs and members of the public watching this debate. Direct life experience in being in the sex class of female has subjected them and me to these experiences. Now, I've been so wary of ever mentioning myself, merely noting that I must speak for those who cannot be heard. However, I press myself to continue to do this, as the Scottish Government has failed to engage with women who've been raped or sexually assaulted via the committee looking at the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. They failed to speak with For Women Scotland, and they're not listening still. Scottish women simply want their legal rights back. They don't want to take rights away from anyone else, and they want their government to do the right thing. And I'm tired of being stuck in a Groundhog Day loop where the Scottish Government states it accepts the result of Supreme Court judgment, insists it will definitely do something at some point. When that something is, and the time frame are never defined, they're asked again, they repeat the lines and so on. Now, decision theory tells us that not making a decision is a decision in of itself. Rather than face the consequences of acting upon the Supreme Court judgment, the Scottish Government has gamed that they would rather live with the consequences of not acting on it. And those consequences are the continued denial of women's rights. Now, what does that say to me? What does that say to the 51% of the Scottish population? Public money is really tight, yet there always appears to be money to contest against women's rights. And I find it incredible that the Scottish Government are going to go head-to-head with For Women Scotland all over again. This despite the Supreme Court judgment and surely the very definition of madness. Now, it seems ironic that today we saw the passing of the Victims, Witnesses and Justice Bill that really recognised the impact of trauma on women. And I hope sensible heads start to prevail and that the Scottish Government understands why safety, dignity and privacy is vital to women like me. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Thompson. I now call Sharon Dowie to be followed by Jackie Bailey. Ms Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I very much welcome this motion brought forward by my friend and colleague Pam Gosal. I especially back the motion's conclusion, which urges the Scottish Government to ensure its policies are in line with the law. The Supreme Court judgment in April was unequivocal in its conclusion that the term woman refers to biological women and that sex refers to biological sex in terms of the Equality Act 2010. Since the ruling, the Scottish Government seems to have been very reluctant to take this message on board, and 5 months on, a range of important public bodies are still waiting for instructions. This shouldn't be difficult. The ruling in itself, as well as being obvious to many of us and long overdue, is in fact very simple. I have recently written to 3 major public sector bodies, Police Scotland, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and the Scottish Prison Service, to inquire as to how they're getting on in enacting the consequences of this ruling. Their replies were worryingly similar and betrayed the same issue. Nothing concrete from SNP ministers has yet arrived, leaving all manner of taxpayer-funded organisations, who are all under the leadership of the Scottish Government, to muddle through on their own. The police told me they were reviewing their guidance, but, and I quote, "No formal guidance, instruction or policy has been provided by the Scottish Government to Police Scotland." The Fire Brigade is also moving forward with some engagement, but like their policing colleagues warned, and I again quote, "At present, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service has not received any formal direction, advice or guidance from the Scottish Government in relation to the ruling." And the Scottish Prison Service said, while it was reviewing matters at pace, it too was awaiting guidance. Presiding Officer, a reasonable person would conclude the Scottish Government is merely closing its eyes and ears and hoping all this goes away. But thanks to the efforts of the groups like For Women Scotland, who have rightly been praised in this motion, we know that won't happen. And ignoring the state of play could have serious ramifications for these organisations. We know that female police officers need protection from dangerous male criminals claiming to be women just so they can be searched by a WPC, humiliated, intimidated and degrading her in the process. We know that female firefighters expect dignity and privacy in a fast-moving and male-dominated organisation. And we know, most shamefully of all, the lengths some male criminals are prepared to go to in order to persuade the Scottish Government they should be incarcerated in a female prison alongside some of society's most vulnerable women. In the absence of strong and unwavering guidance from the Scottish Government, these organisations cannot go full steam ahead with the changes they need to make. And we know they want to. The Scottish Fire and Rescue Service told me, and I quote, "The Supreme Court ruling has provided important clarity." And all this is to say nothing of the situation in schools, hospitals and other public sector workplaces, all of whom desperately need action from this Scottish Government. Presiding Officer, it isn't a choice for Parliament to respect the ruling of the Supreme Court. It is a duty. Doing so doesn't just uphold the law, but strengthens and protects the rights of women and girls across Scotland. Several months have now passed since this ruling, and disappointingly, the Scottish ministers appear to have made no progress to ensure its public bodies are following the rule of law. I hope this motion focuses some minds on government benches, and I'm delighted to give it my full and unwavering support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Dowie. I now call Jackie Bailey to be followed by Michael Chapman. Ms Bailey.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and can I thank Pam Gosal for bringing this debate to Parliament and echo her comments about For Women Scotland. Presiding Officer, when the Supreme Court was founded in 2009 under a previous Labour government, it finally removed judges from the House of Lords and separated the different arms of the state. Politicians might make the law, but it was independent judges who would decide whether it was being appropriately and fairly applied. In April, the Supreme Court did just that, when it ruled that a woman is defined by biological sex under equalities law. As Lord Hodge said at the time, this isn't about pitting one group against the other, but about interpreting the meaning of the Equality Act of 2010. A court is a place to settle debates and clear up confusion. At the time of the ruling, the current First Minister was among those who said that the ruling gave clarity. And I agree. And he pledged to engage in the implications of the ruling, and I think we can all agree that that was the sensible thing to do. So I have to ask myself, why, nearly 6 months on, are we having this debate? It should be simple. The court has clarified the law, we are all bound by the law, we should respect it, we should implement it. There is no need to wait for more guidance or consultations to follow the law. We can start the process now. All we're asking is for the Scottish Government to follow the law. They cannot both be lawmakers and lawbreakers, because just as the Supreme Court provides clarity to the Scottish Government, there are countless public sector employers in Scotland who rely on the Scottish Government to provide clarity to them. And if the Scottish Government will not show leadership, who do they turn to? Because the First Minister could issue a letter today to public bodies underlining the position and reminding bodies that they need to act in accordance with the law. Failure to do so will simply lead to more expensive court challenges, such as the Sandy Peggy case in NHS Fife, and we know this is costing the public purse a huge amount of money when the NHS, frankly, is in crisis. Other cases are in the pipeline because the Scottish Government are intent on delay. A report by the Ethical Standards Commissioner this week noted a tendency of policymakers to seek to apply their own policies rather than following national law, and for organisations to attempt to go beyond the law. As a result, it warned that practice has diverged from legislation to a point at which there is perceived competition and resulting tension between equality groups. I come to this from the perspective of being a health and social care spokesperson. I'm acutely aware of how busy and overworked staff are in hospitals, including managers trying to fill shifts and ensuring that their frontline teams don't burn out. They don't have time for politics or ideological debates. They need to know that they are being supported and following rules that are legal and fair. What our NHS needs is more equipment, better working conditions, more investment in primary care. What it doesn't need is more employment tribunals. According to some estimates, the case of Sandy Peggy versus NHS Fife will eventually cost as much as £1 million, not including any potential compensation. NHS Fife has already spent £250,000 on legal fees alone. And it's the taxpayer and patients who will bear the costs. The longer the Scottish Government drags its feet, the greater the risk of more tribunals, more confusion, more tensions in the workplace. What employers need now is clarity, so they can get on and think about the best way to accommodate the different needs of all of their staff. The SNP should today tell its public bodies to follow the law. No more delay, no more equivocation. Get on with it.
Thank you, Ms Bailey. I now call Maggie Chapman to be followed by Rona Mackay. Ms Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It doesn't give me any pleasure to speak in this afternoon's debate, but I'm doing it because it's important that those who do not welcome the Supreme Court's judgment, those who have had their lives made considerably worse by it, are represented in our Parliament today. This debate frames women's rights as if they are in conflict with trans rights. I want to state at the outset that is simply not true. Women's rights and trans rights are not in competition. They are deeply interwoven. Our struggle is a shared one against patriarchal structures that seek to police our bodies, define us narrowly, and limit our freedom. The Supreme Court's ruling has, in effect, rewritten the Equality Act to reduce the definition of woman and sex to so-called biological terms. In doing so, it has stripped away rights that many trans people relied upon and, crucially, it has made life harder, not safer, for all women, cis and trans alike. Since this ruling, hundreds of testimonies have poured in from people across Scotland and the UK. The report, A Community Living in Fear, published by Transaxial, captures the scale of the crisis. People are terrified. One trans woman described the ruling as profoundly dehumanising, saying, "It not only invalidates the lived realities of trans women like myself, but sends a broader message that we are to be excluded, further fueling discrimination, isolation and abuse that many of us already face daily." Another trans mother of a young son told how she now feels she cannot even take her child into the toilet in public. "I haven't been to a toilet outside of the house since, because now I am scared. Is this my future? I don't want my 3-year-old exposed to harassment just because of who I am." These are not abstract fears, they are daily lived realities. The ruling has emboldened those who wish to exclude, harass and intimidate. It has left people considering emigration, facing panic attacks and, heartbreakingly, openly discussing suicidal thoughts. And let us be very clear, this ruling does nothing to protect women. On the contrary, it places all women under greater scrutiny. As one cis woman explained, "Since this ruling, I find myself terrified." I'm using the words...
Ms Chapman, please resume your seat. I don't think the member was taking an intervention.
No.
Point of order, Richard Hamilton.
Order, Presiding Officer. I personally object to be calling a cis woman.
I thank Ms Hamilton for her point of order. What I would say, of course, is that we are a parliament, we will debate issues, and it is always the role, and if I could finish, it is always the role of the Chair to protect the rights of members to scrutinise, to debate robustly, and to challenge each other robustly. I've heard the language that the member used. I don't think that the member was referring to any specific member by using that terminology. Obviously, the member has now heard that, for instance, Ms Hamilton would not regard that terminology vis-à-vis herself as being other than personally insulting, and therefore I hope that the member in question would not use that terminology as far as that member is concerned. But I think the member's use of the terminology was in a wider context. I don't think it was directed at Ms Hamilton. And with that, I would ask the member to resume.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As one cis woman explained, since this ruling, I find myself terrified before I dress to go out in public. I'm unwilling to be an unauthentic version of me, but I keep thinking, maybe if I wear this, I'll be less likely to be misgendered or more likely to be left alone. This ruling will make everyone a judge of whether you are woman enough. End quote. That is the reality. This ruling narrows and polices womanhood, reinforcing patriarchal control instead of dismantling it. We must resist the false choice between women's rights and trans rights. When women are reduced to biology, we all lose. When trans people are denied dignity, we all lose. When rights are stripped away from any community, none of us is safe. I stand with women, I stand with trans people, I stand with all who refuse to be pitted against one another. Together, we must reject attempts to roll back rights and instead build a Scotland where every person, cis, trans and non-binary, can live free from fear, with dignity and with equal protection under the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. I now call Rona Mackay to be followed by Douglas Ross. Ms Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The subject of this debate has, as we know, become divisive and controversial, and the legal proceedings currently underway impact what can be said here in the Chamber. My view is that respectful debate on differing opinions should always be possible. Everyone should be able to speak freely, and I would hope that differing views come from a good place. My colleague Michelle and I have always had differing views on this issue, but that doesn't mean I respect her less, and I hope the feeling is mutual. My own view is that there is no hierarchy on equality, and discussion taken in this Parliament must be mindful of the rights of everyone, the LGBT community included. Presiding Officer, I know the current debate and that leading up to it for many months has been incredibly stressful and upsetting for trans people and for their friends and family. No one deserves to have their personal lives the subject of political debate, which inevitably leads to malicious social media interactions and publicity. I cannot begin to imagine what it must be like to be the parent of a trans child or the sibling of a trans man or woman in this current climate. The Government have made it clear that they will comply with the recent Supreme Court judgment, as of course we must always act within the law at all times. And work has begun to ensure that policies, practices, procedure and guidance are compatible with the judgment of the Supreme Court. Presiding Officer, I think it's important to reiterate that this judgment is not a licence for division and hostility. The pursuit of equality for women, trans and non-binary people remains our collective responsibility, and the judge confirmed that the outcome of the case must not be seen as a victory for those on either side of the debate. We're dealing with people's lives, and the Scottish Government is fully committed to protecting everyone's rights and building a fairer Scotland for all. So the Supreme Court has confirmed the Scottish Government followed the guidance of the EHRC at all times. Indeed, we carried out work and guidance for gender representation on public boards in good faith by following the relevant EHRC guidance. Due process was followed as the Scottish Government won both cases in the inner and outer houses of the Court of Session. Now, in light of judgment of the Supreme Court, the Scottish Government will maintain its respect to the courts and move forward with implementation. Renewed and updated guidance from the EHRC will be key in ensuring legislative compliance. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, the trans and non-binary communities will always be a valued part of our society.
Non-binary people and trans men and women are our friends, our neighbours, work colleagues and members of our family. The very least they deserve is our respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. I now call Douglas Ross to be followed by Ash Regan. Mr Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I congratulate Pam Gossel for securing today's debate, the motion she put forward and her opening speech, which I think set the scene very well, rightly recognising the women in the gallery, and particularly for Women Scotland, for everything they have done on this issue and sadly have to continue to do, and I'll get to that in a moment. Can I, however, say that I've often been quite critical of the level of the debate and the quality of contributions in this chamber, and I would include myself in that at times. And I have to say tonight that view was cemented, having had to endure Maggie Chapman's, quite frankly, disgraceful speech. But if I see that as a negative, I see it as a positive of having been in the chamber tonight to listen to Michelle Thompson. And I would challenge anyone to listen to her contribution again, or to read it in the official record, and not see a woman very passionate about the issue she is fighting for, very personal about what she's saying, and we're privileged to Michelle Thompson for opening up like that. But surely that's a clear message to the Minister that an impassioned plea from your own backbenches, from your own party, must be listened to, must be accepted, must be heard. And my question to the Minister is, why are we here? Why are we here 5 months on after a Supreme Court ruling? This is a government who, at lightning speed, can introduce legislation, get involved in any host of issues. If Westminster says something they don't like, the power of the civil service and SNP ministers comes tumbling down within minutes or hours. If there's an issue about independence that needs to be politicised, they will do it immediately. But when the rights of women and girls are reaffirmed by the highest court in the land, we get nothing. I'd like to know from the Minister exactly what the government have done for 5 months. So she said in her response to Pam Gossel that they are waiting for more guidance and then they will update everyone. What more is needed? What more is needed than the final word from the Supreme Court? Yeah. That was as clear as day to those who had to take their government to court, who won that case and expected it to be implemented immediately. I'm not sure this government really does respect that ruling, because if they did respect it, they would implement that ruling. They would have put out the guidance which is needed in our prisons, which is needed in our schools, but is still not being delivered. I recently had the privilege of being in the audience when Trina Budge was speaking about this case, and I know she's in the gallery today, and I hope I can spare her blushes, but she had the audience captivated, but also immensely frustrated about what Trina and other campaigners and For Women Scotland have had to do. And I think when people look back at the history books, they will be amazed and appalled that women had to go to court against their own government to simply get the definition that sex means biological sex in law. And then they'll flick over a few more pages and wonder, why then did it take so long for this government that says it respects that decision to do anything about it? Minister, I hope in some ways you're uncomfortable with contributions tonight, because this should not be comfortable for a government. As Jackie Baillie says, you cannot on one hand make the laws of the land and then refuse to implement legal judgments that come down. There is an onus on this government to act, and act quickly, for this Parliament, for MSPs representing our constituents and for Scotland. We are watching this government to finally, even at this late stage, to acknowledge, respect and therefore implement the ruling of the Supreme Court. It must be done, and it must be done now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Ross. I would advise the Chamber that before calling the next speaker, I would advise the Chamber that due to the number of members who would wish to speak in this debate, I am minded to accept a motion without notice under Rule 8.14.3 to extend the debate by up to 30 minutes, and I now invite Pam Gossel to move a motion without notice.
Agreed, Presiding Officer.
Moved. Thank you. The question is that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I now call Ash Regan to be followed by Rachel Hamilton. Ms Regan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I join others in congratulating Pam Gossel on bringing this important debate to the Chamber.
motions recognising this topic, including my own from back in April, recognise the unanimous judgment of the Supreme Court in For Women Scotland versus Scottish Ministers, which was delivered on the 16th of April this year. Yet 5 months on, government and legal advisers are oddly still trying to convince the people of Scotland that applying the clarity from the Apex Court is somehow complex. The ruling was clear, it was decisive, it was historic. The Supreme Court affirmed beyond doubt that the words woman and sex in the Equality Act of 2010 means biological woman and biological sex. The judgment was not only unanimous but necessary. And it's necessary because the Scottish Government has for far too long pursued policies, guidance and legislation that undermined the basic protections guaranteed to women under the Equality Act. And it was crucial because without this clarity, women's rights, hard won over generations, were being eroded in practice in front of our eyes. And I want to congratulate For Women Scotland, who are here with us in the chamber today, for their courage, for their persistence and for their dedication. And they did this against the odds, without the resources of government at their disposal, and they carried that fight all the way to the highest court, not for recognition, not for power, but for the fundamental principle that women's rights matter. And that those rights and those protections need to be rooted in biological sex. And the First Minister, I believe, hopefully is watching this debate this evening, must now honour the promise that he made to meet with For Women Scotland, who have now, of course, been forced to take the government back to the courts to make the government comply with the law. This is shameful, Minister. And this is not an abstract legal debate. It goes to the very heart of women's safety, their dignity and their equality. It has implications, as we all know, for women's prisons, for hospital wards, for women's sports and for every single sex service that women and girls depend upon. And it has implications for the support services available to women recovering from prostitution, from male violence and abuse. And it has implications for the principle of trust in the rule of law itself. If a unanimous judgment of the UK Supreme Court can be met with foot-dragging and confusion, then women in Scotland are really entitled to ask, whose side is this government really on? Saying, Minister, that you accept the Supreme Court's ruling must result in action, without qualification, without caveat and without delay. And with respect, that is not currently happening. Withdrawing all the policies and guidance that do not comply with the Equality Act as interpreted by the Court. So let this Parliament send a clear message today. Women's rights are not negotiable. The meaning of woman is not up for reinterpretation. And in Scotland, the law is not optional. For Women Scotland have done their part. The Supreme Court have now done their part. And so it's now time for the government to do its part, to uphold the law, to uphold its promises, and to uphold the rights of women and girls across Scotland.
Thank you, Ms Regan. In fact, I now call Tess White to be followed by Rachel Hamilton. Ms White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I apologise for being 40 seconds late for this debate. Presiding Officer, I also pay tribute to my colleague Pam Gossall for securing the parliamentary time for this important debate. Thank you. We are 5 months on from the Supreme Court judgment. It should shame this SNP government that MSPs are still having to call for policies to be updated in line with the law. And today I am delighted that Jackie Bailey has spoken in this debate, and I am thankful, Jackie Bailey, but I would have liked to have seen more of my Labour colleagues speaking in this debate tonight. And to Maggie Chapman, I'd just like to say I personally find the term cis woman offensive. And I'd like to say to Rona Mackay that, you got the short straw for you to come here tonight to be the spokesperson of the Scottish Government. When Scottish ministers are determined to dodge scrutiny, we must use every available lever to demand answers. And it's shocking that my colleague has to bring a members' debate to actually do this. Whether it's arrogance or ignorance, presiding officer, we won't let the SNP get away with it. And let me first congratulate the tenacious trio who are here today at For Women Scotland: Marion Calder, Susan Smith, getting emotional now, and Trina Budge, who courageously fought for women's sex-based rights from their kitchen tables to the highest court in the land. And after meeting on Mumsnet, it was these three incredible women who defended women's rights, while this SNP government and its army of lawyers did their best to dismantle them. Sex Matters and Scottish lesbians as interveners in the case should also be thanked. The Supreme Court judgment, presiding officer, was unanimous. Under the Equality Act 2010, woman means biological woman and sex means biological sex. And you can't get clearer than that, presiding officer. No ifs, no buts. The Scottish Parliament has acted to comply with the law. So too has the City of Edinburgh Council. Even the beleaguered Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre has fallen into line. But this SNP government, there are still men in women's prisons. Too many hospital wards are still mixed sex. Women and girls are still having to get changed in gender-neutral changing rooms at their local leisure centres. And children went back to school in August with unlawful trans guidance still in place. Teenage girls are still having to share school toilets with boys. Presiding officer, it's absolutely shocking. Shamefully, there has been no directive from John Swinney to Scotland's public bodies to comply with the Supreme Court ruling, leaving them, as my colleague Jackie Bailey said, leaving them wide open to litigation. The foot-dragging from Scotland's First Minister is sending a clear message to women and girls across the country. And Michelle Thompson said today that inaction is action. The captured SNP would rather keep our rights in limbo than confront biological reality. The SNP is fixated on self-ID, pandering to party activists rather than upholding the rule of law. And it isn't wishful thinking, presiding officer, it's willful ignorance. And now Scottish ministers are throwing away even more taxpayers' money, defending themselves again in court. I don't know if the figure, it was quoted as £250,000. My understanding is this week it's up to £600,000. And as Jackie Bailey said, it could be up to £1 million. That's shocking. And it's not being paid for by NHS Fife. A small part is, the large part is being paid for by the Scottish Government. There are fears that the can could be kicked well into 2026. And I would like to ask the Minister, and please note this, Minister, in closing, I would like you to address this point. Is the Scottish Government going to kick this into 2026, or is it going to follow the law this year? Because it beggars belief if it's being kicked down the road into next year. And I say to the SNP government that the game is up. It's up. Nobody, and Jackie Bailey has said this several times in this chamber, as well as us, nobody is above the law. The Supreme Court has provided clarity. Now, the SNP government must restore its tattered credibility. And in closing, presiding officer, I echo the words of women and girls up and down the country who can't speak for themselves. Just get on with it. Women won't be ignored and we won't wait. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms White. And I call Rachel Hamilton.
Presiding officer, how long do I have?
Up to 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank Pam Gosell for bringing this very important debate forward, to demand accountability to the Scottish Government for their pathetic response to a decision made 5 months ago by the Supreme Court, which did, as many people have said today, confirm that the definition of woman in the Equality Act means biological women. May I also take this opportunity to thank for Women Scotland the campaigners Trina Budge, Marion Calder and Susan Smith. But also I'd like at this point to thank campaigners Sandy Peggy and Lee Hurley. And I'd also like to thank MBM. I'd like to thank Dr Lucy Hunter-Blackburn, Lisa Mackenzie and the whole team and any other women who are with us today in the gallery, because these women have given people like me the confidence to speak with clarity on these issues. In the past, I may have been undermined and intimidated by the comments that someone like my colleague MSP Maggie Chapman makes. But I want to challenge Maggie Chapman because, presiding officer, what kind of democracy are we living in when supporting sex-based definitions and opposing the views of certain individuals in this chamber who believe that 8-year-olds can socially transition, and we are accused of perpetuating prejudice and being transphobic? And I think that is not the place here in this chamber to be making these statements. But furthermore, I also believe that it is important that we do not undermine the rule of law, and that is the most important aspect of why we are challenging the government and holding them to account for not delivering the Supreme Court decision. Because, for example, one individual, it may have been the same individual, accused the Supreme Court of bigotry, prejudice and hatred. I want to move on to some of the other comments that have been made in the chamber, particularly those of Sharon Dowie. And Sharon Dowie always stands up for victims. And we know that she didn't mention the rapist, Isla Bryson, self-ID rapist, who was housed in HMP Corton Vale. But, presiding officer, there are still men being housed in women's facilities in Scotland. We also have heard about the trans guidance in schools. There are teachers being accused of transphobia. The guidance is not clear, and it's the government's job to deliver the guidance. I just want to go back to Michelle Thompson's speech, because she's not here in the chamber. She apologised for having to leave earlier. But I agree with my colleague Douglas Ross. That was a very brave speech. Michelle Thompson, like very many other women, for example, women in prisons who are being re-traumatised, Michelle Thompson very bravely talks about her trauma and how she feels when she is in some spaces with men. And none of us who have actually experienced what Michelle Thompson have experienced in her life will ever feel that. So, well done to Michelle Thompson. And I think that if the Minister takes this fully on board, CoCab Stewart would 100% listen to one of her backbenchers who've delivered one of the most powerful speeches in Pam Gosell's debate today, and actually get on and deliver it. Deliver this change, deliver this guidance, make sure that people, particularly women and girls, are protected. We really deserve better. Women in Scotland deserve better, and we deserve leaders who are not going to sacrifice our safety and our privacy for political ideology. We deserve clarity and not confusion, fairness and not fairyland. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. And I now call on Minister CoCab Stewart to respond to the debate. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have listened very, very carefully to all the contributors this afternoon in this debate. I won't be able to refer to everybody individually, but I will try to address as many points as I can that were raised. The Scottish Government has consistently made it clear that it accepts the Supreme Court ruling for Women Scotland Limited against the Scottish Ministers in relation to the definition of the term woman in the Equality Act of 2010. And since April, we have been taking forward the detailed work that is necessary as a consequence of the ruling. Now, that work is ongoing and it's being coordinated by a senior-level cross-government working group that is convened by the Permanent Secretary. Our approach is...
Douglas Ross.
I'm sure the Minister has asked this question since it's gone right to the top with the Permanent Secretary. What timescale have civil servants given the Minister for when that work will be completed?
Minister.
I can't give you a timescale to that. There are so many different areas that the judgment actually may or may not cover, and that work has to be done in a methodical way. So I was going on to say, to actually address that point, that the approach is focused on coordinating government action in the context of legal complexity, ensuring accuracy and clarity. I would also like to make clear that the decision of the Supreme Court does not remove trans people's protections from discrimination, and that was a point that was made explicitly by the Supreme Court in its judgment. And we have been clear since the Supreme Court ruling that we accept that. We're taking forward the work that is necessary as a consequence of it. And every key area of government which is or may be affected by the judgment is carrying out those assessments. I will.
Rachel Hamilton.
I'm slightly confused because if the Minister is getting this guidance out and about and going to act on the decision made by the Supreme Court, why is the Scottish Government going to challenge For Women Scotland in a challenge against this decision?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, you will be well aware that I will not comment on any live litigation cases. So to continue to give some examples of the work that we have done already. So we have already updated the guidance on the gender representation on Public Boards Scotland Act 2018. We have amended the recruitment process for the appointments to public bodies subject to the 2018 Act. And through joint working with Police Scotland, we will publicly consult on the Stop and Search Code of Practice before the end of this year. The Supporting Transgender Young People in Schools guidance is being reviewed, recognising that the EHRC are also reviewing the technical guidance for school. So, as I said, our approach is focused on ensuring accuracy and clarity, avoiding unnecessary complexity or confusion at a time where there is heightened public debate. I will.
Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, and I'm grateful to the Minister for taking the intervention. But I referred to a report by the Ethical Standards Commissioner, who is not known, for being outrageous, I think we could agree. And he's saying that policy is getting ahead of the law. You have a direct role in that. It doesn't require thinking through. It requires the government to say to its public bodies, don't get ahead of the law, follow the law. Why can't you do that?
Always through the chair. Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We have actually done that. I did remind myself of the fact that in May we actually published our note that was sent to all public bodies, and it made it very clear that public bodies should satisfy themselves that they are compliant with the law and they are reviewing all the necessary guidance and policies. Because I know that was raised by other people to imply that we had not offered that instruction, and we had. Thank you. So, just reminding the Parliament, also taking this opportunity, that equality for women and girls is a priority for this government, and I have heard very powerful testimonies this afternoon of why that is so important, and a reminder that it is at the heart of our vision for a fair and prosperous Scotland for everybody. And as the government, we are determined to deliver for women and girls and to address those inequalities where they arise. Can I just progress a little bit? I realise I'm running out of time here. I have taken interventions. So just to outline some of that work that we are doing, but I do want to again re-emphasise that the ongoing work on the implications of the Supreme Court judgment is not about pitting the rights of two groups of people against each other, but about equality, dignity and the rights of all. And I do want to make it clear that trans men and women are valued in society. They exist, they always have done, and they must enjoy the same human rights as all in society, as well as protections under the Equality Act. And I do sincerely believe that the vast majority of people in Scotland want to live in a country that is respectful, compassionate and caring and protects the rights of all. It is not a competition, and our work to support trans people in Scotland is absolutely not at the expense of our vital support for women and girls. So I do want to go on to just mention the work, the strategic work that is taking place on that, the First Minister's National Advisory Council on Women and Girls, and the voices and views of a diverse range of women and girls, including those on the Empowering Women's panel. The violence against women and girls was mentioned, and I want to highlight the Equally Safe, which is the world-leading strategy, and through that, by strengthening the laws that enable us to respond robustly to perpetrators and protect women and girls, for instance, through the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act of 2018. We've mentioned trauma-informed approaches, making sure we take those, especially for people who have experienced, women who have experienced sexual violence, and change the laws so that victims of rape and sexual assault can get the health care without having to report the assault to the police in the first place. Forgive me, I am going to make progress. I thank you for your leeway. I know I'm above my time. So we have taken forward a great deal of work to ensure that those working in the public sector are equipped with the resources and knowledge to confidently and sensitively work with those affected by violence against women and girls. Just a brief mention on the area of health. We published the first Women's Health Plan in the UK, and currently we're working on the second phase of that process as well. And that led to achievements, including the appointment of Scotland's first Women's Health Champion, Professor Anna Glazier, as well.
Minister, please resume your seat for a second. Point of order, Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I cannot for the life of me believe that the Minister is talking to the motion presiding officer. It's very frustrating. We're trying to hold the government to account on not delivering the Supreme Court decision, and the Minister is talking about health plans and domestic violence.
I thank Ms Hamilton for her point of order. What I would say is that, having listened carefully to the Minister's response thus far, I know that she has specifically addressed issues that have been raised in the motion. I think what the Minister has been doing in the last minute or so is reflecting on wider actions that the Government is taking, but on the basis also that time is now pressing, perhaps the Minister could bring her remarks to a close, focusing on indeed the issues raised in the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I will bring my remarks to a close. I hope that I have given reassurances that this government absolutely accepts the Supreme Court judgment. I have given clear examples of the actions that we are taking, and I would just like to just point out that actually, the EHRC have only just recently, on the 5th of September, submitted their revised Code of Practice to the UK government, of which we have not yet seen, but it just is another demonstration and a sign that it is vital to take time to fully consider the impact of the judgment and its consequences, which we are doing. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate, and I close this meeting.